Brazil, the death toll after the floods and mudslides in the city of Petrópolis rose to 104. Over 130 people are still missing. Chilean Constitutional Convention approved the autonomy of the territorial entities and the plurinationality of the state. Russia denounced the intensification of Ukrainian provocations near the demarcation line in Donbass, while the UN Security Council and NATO nations meet simultaneously to discuss tensions in the region. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Now we continue. In Brazil, the death toll after the floods and the mudslides in the city of Petrópolis rose to 104. Authorities report that over 130 people are still missing. Rio State's firefighter department said the tally of deaths is expected to increase even further. The amount of vehicles and rubble swept away by the water difficults the search and rescue operations. The civil defense informed at least 54 houses were destroyed and almost 400 people have been evacuated to shelters. Meanwhile, firefighting teams pointed out that in only 6 hours it rained more than expected for the month of February. A 6.8 magnitude earthquake that struck western Guatemala on Wednesday caused damage affecting nearly 25,000 people and caused one person to suffer a fatal heart attack. The epicenter of the quake, which struck at the depth of 84 kilometers, was in the coastal district of Escuintla, less than 100 kilometers southwest of the capital, Guatemala City. Guatemalan authorities estimated and also stated that the quake was followed by an aftershock of 4.8. According to rescue services, the quake caused landslides on roads, damage to houses, and power outages affecting some 24,000 people. A 50-year-old woman died of a heart attack in a village west of the capital, which officials linked to the tremor. The quake was felt as far as El Salvador, to the southeast of Guatemala and the south of Mexico.
Three people died from heart conditions associated with the earthquake in Baja Verapaz, Guatemala, and Quetzaltenango. 3 houses with minor and moderate damages in Villa Canales and Totonicampan. 16 roads damaged in 6 departments, 10 buildings and a temple affected in 4 departments. Nationwide surveillance continues. We ask the population to remain calm.
At least 3 people were killed and severe storms lashed Central Europe on Thursday, with winds of up to 181 kilometers per hour, causing widespread travel disruption. In Germany, several schools were forced to close while the storm uprooted trees and disrupted the transport. In Poland, gusts of 125 kilometers per hour seriously damaged more than 500 homes, felled hundreds of trees, and left more than 300,000 households across the country without power overnight. Polish authorities said 2 people died and 2 more were injured after storms toppled a large crane at a construction site, and another person was killed by a tree that fell on his car in the west of the country. The Czech Republic was also hit, with more than 300,000 households left without power and extensive traffic disruptions as fallen trees blocked roads and railways. On Wednesday, a Peruvian judge ordered a 1-year ban from leaving the country of former President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski, who is under investigation for corruption. The magistrate, Jorge Chavez, ordered the measure against the former president, who is currently serving a preventive prison sentence at his home for health reasons and due to his advanced age. This last ruling could lead to the elimination of the punishment due to the absence of danger of fleeing. The former neoliberal president is being investigated for favoring the Brazilian company Odebrecht in a road project when he was the prime minister and the head of the economy in the government of Alejandro Toledo between 2001 and 2006. Kuczynski is also being investigated for improper business dealings with Odebrecht through a financial consultancy firm he owned. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Independence of Judges and Lawyers, Diego García Sayán, is in Bolivia to investigate the degradation of justice during the 2019 coup d'etat. The relator arrived in the country on Tuesday and began his work with an interview in which the Vice President David Choquehuanca, the Minister of Justice Iván Lima, and the Chancellor Rogelio Mayra participated. In the afternoon, the meeting was with the relatives of former President Yanin Áñez and the former military personnel who were affected by the justice system, and from this Wednesday, he visited the victims and relatives of victims of the Sacaba and Sankara massacres, as well as different acts of torture. Once his visit is over, García Sayán will submit a preliminary report to be presented to the correspondent commission. And Cristina Calderón, the last native speaker of Chile's indigenous Yagan language, has died at the age of 93. Calderón, known locally as Grandma Abuela Cristina, was recognized in 2009 by the Chilean government as a living human treasure for her work in preserving a culture at risk of extinction. Until near the end of her long life, she spent her days making traditional reed baskets and other handicrafts and imparting the language and culture of her people to her descendants. The Yanganov once lived off fishing, paddling their canoes along coastal waterways, but mostly rely on tourism now, making handicrafts and working as seasonal laborers. In this context, during a session of the Constitutional Convention, its president, Elisa Loncón, dedicated a few words of recognition in the Mapuche language to Cristina Calderón and asked for a minute of silence in her honor.
I say to Sister Cristina Calderón that her work is done. She did it very well. She taught us all how to defend the languages, and also here she has her daughter fighting for those rights. So may she rest in peace. May she have all the comfort to live and live well. I ask for a minute of silence.
Let's listen to Cristina Calderón, the last native speaker of the Yagan people.
Hein welisa sa weligwa and kurska. Teni klarna san kinusikut patamul funat. Sa ikem weligwa sa.
Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. In the early hours of Thursday morning, the plenary session of the Chilean Constitutional Convention approved the autonomy of the territorial entities and the plurinationality of the state, among other norms. After more than 10 hours of session, 28 of the 36 articles proposed by the Commission of the Form of State, Organization, Autonomy, Decentralization, Equity, Territorial Justice, Local governments and fiscal organization were approved. One of the highlights was the vote on the section that establishes Chile as a regional, plurinational and intercultural state, which obtained 112 votes in favor, surpassing the mandate of the 2/3, meaning 103 votes. From now on, the articles coming out of the committee will be voted on, in particular on Friday, 18 February. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro Moros held a meeting on Wednesday with Russian Deputy Prime Minister Yuri Borisov as part of the agenda on the Intergovernmental Commission of both nations. At the meeting, the authorities assessed the development of the agreements signed last October 2021 within the framework of strengthening strategic cooperation. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro Moros expressed his gratitude to the Eurasian nation for its support during the COVID-19 pandemic. It was also an opportunity to reaffirm the bonds of brotherhood between the countries and their leaders. Earlier, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Yuri Borisov also held a meeting with Vice President Delcy Rodriguez and other officials and representatives of the Bolivarian government within the framework of a session of the Russia-Venezuela High-Level Intergovernmental Commission. During the meeting, Borisov stressed that Venezuela has become a strategic partner for his country in Latin America and at the same time stressed the importance of geostrategic coordination between Moscow and Caracas. In Honduras on Wednesday, the extradition judge of first instance of the Supreme Court of Justice of that Central American nation issued the provisional detention of the former president of the country, Juan Orlando Hernández, who is requested by the Justice of the United States for allegedly incurring in the crimes of drug trafficking and the use of weapons. The Supreme Court details that the hearing of presentation and evacuation of evidence in the case of Hernández will be next March 16th. Juan Orlando Hernández attended the court hearing under heavy security measures and in compliance with his human rights and due process. Magistrate Edwin Ortiz, who was appointed by the court to carry out the extradition process of Hernández, will decide during the hearings if the former president will continue to be detained at the National Directorate of Special Forces or if he will be sent to the 1st Infantry Battalion to serve preventive detention. For its part, the U.S. Embassy in Tegucigalpa accuses Hernández of plotting to import controlled substances into that country, such as 500,000 kilograms of cocaine since 2004. At the same time, the embassy asserts that the former Honduran president must answer for the alleged crimes of manufacture, distribution, and possession of a controlled substance on board of a U.S. registered aircraft, as well as aiding and abetting the use, power, and possession of machine guns and destructive devices. Now we continue to other informations. Foreign ministers from the Association of the Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, in Cambodia Thursday for the annual gathering. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, not all foreign ministers were physically present during the meeting. The foreign ministers from the Thailand and Brunei attended online, while Vietnam's representative attended virtually from his hotel room after he tested positive for the coronavirus upon arrival in Cambodia. The Southeast Asian nation, current Asian chair, said earlier this month that members of the regional group had failed to reach a consensus on inviting Myanmar foreign minister to its meetings. The decision to restrict Myanmar's participation reflected a disagreement over the country's lack of cooperation in implementing measures agreed upon by ASEAN last year to help ease the country's violent political crisis after the army's takeover. Hamas spokesperson Hazim Qasem condemned Australia's decision to list Hamas movement as a terrorist organization and called on the Australian government to present an apology to the Palestinian people.
We completely denounce and condemn Australia's decision to list Hamas movement as a terrorist organization. This biased decision towards the Zionist aggression and its narrative against our Palestinian people encourages it to escalate its aggression and to keep on denying the rights of our Palestinian people. Such a decision radically contradicts with international laws and resolutions which grant the Palestinian people the right to resist against the occupation. The occupation which deliberately killed civilians, including children and women, in the West Bank and Gaza, is the one that should be listed as a terrorist. We call on the Australian government to immediately retract this decision and to apologize to our Palestinian people, because the accusation of Hamas being a terror group is an accusation against the Palestinian people's struggle history.
Finance ministers and central bank governors of G20 nations began a two-day meeting on Thursday, with Indonesia's leader warning the Ukraine crisis was a threat to the post-pandemic recovery. The Group of 20, which brings together the world's biggest economies, including the United States, China, and some European nations, held the talks in a hybrid format in the capital, Jakarta. Opening the meeting, Indonesian President Joko Widodo warned of the risks of the global economy of the crisis in Ukraine, where fears are growing about an alleged invasion from Russia. Rocketing global inflation was in focus at the meeting as central banks began tightening rates and withdrawing massive stimulus introduced during the pandemic. Other issues on the agenda were debt restructuring for poor countries and the reform of global health systems.
The emergence of the new variant Omicron has also contributed to heightened uncertainty in the global economy. And like previous variant of COVID-19 that is affecting countries at different times, the divergence of capacity to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic, including the vaccine rollout across countries are major factors that are leading to the uneven recovery. The pandemic also provides us with a harsh reminder of the vulnerability of our global economy of non-traditional shock. Climate change could pose even a bigger threat than the pandemic. The G20 must play a role in combating climate change.
Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said on Thursday China has been honoring the G20 debt service suspension initiative for the poorest countries on a full scale.
In accordance with the G20 consensus, China has been fully implementing the G20 debt service suspension initiative for the poorest countries and managed the highest deferral amount among G20 members. In addition, the relevant non-official financial institutions in China have also taken debt relief actions in a comparable manner with reference to the terms of the debt service suspension initiative. This is rare among the G20 countries. China has also worked with the relevant other members of the G20 to handle individual debt cases of some countries within the common framework. These measures taken by China have played a positive role in easing the debt burden on the relevant countries.
And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Russia denounced the intensification of Ukrainian provocations near the demarcation line in Donbass, while the UN Security Council and nations meet simultaneously to discuss tensions in the region. Kremlin officials indicated that the situation in Ukraine near the common border could evolve from information attacks to a new spiral of war at any moment. Authorities in Moscow denounced that the Western press spreads information about the concentration of Russian troops in the border area, but says nothing about the enormous attack capacity of the Ukrainian armed forces of the demarcation line. In this context, both the UN Security Council and the NATO are assessing the conflict in the region on Thursday. We'll remain on topic. Italian Foreign Minister Luigi Di Maio said on Thursday that his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov had assured him that Moscow wanted to find a diplomatic solution to the Ukraine crisis. Speaking at a joint news conference following the talks, Di Maio said he welcomed an announcement by Lavrov that Russia will send a reply to the United States later in the day on the issue of security guarantees. Moscow has demanded that Washington and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization guarantee Ukraine will never be permitted to join the ranks of the United States-led military alliance. It has also called for NATO to cease all military activities in Eastern Europe. Those demands have been flatly rejected, but the U.S. has sent proposals to Moscow aimed at diffusing tensions by finding areas of agreement on other security issues.
When will the escalation end? This is not our term. We did not come up with it. It was invented by propagandists. It has already become a cliché. These are unscrupulous attempts to evade responsibility for those key actors in Ukraine who are, in fact, being controlled by the West. The Americans are definitely trying to control it externally and put blame on Russia for everything that happens there. Replying to a question about the possibility of Russia invading Ukraine, our servicemen calmly deployed on their own territory. They conducted military exercises, then they packed their tents, loaded the equipment onto rails and started leaving, but the hysteria continues.
In an effort to renew and deepen their partnership, the African Union and the European Union inaugurated the 2022 EU-AU Summit in Brussels on Thursday. The two-day gathering was initially planned for 2020 but was postponed due to the coronavirus pandemic and agenda issues. It was the first time EU and African Union leaders have met in this format since 2017. The COVID-19 global health pandemic formed part of the key topics during the summit, and eyes are on this latest meeting to see if it will help reshape the relationship between the two international organizations. Some still remain skeptical about the summit reaching any real results. Gatherings such as this often lead to statements of solidarity that do not always translate to any practical benefit, particularly when it comes to the impact of COVID-19 on the African continent. Nigerian health authorities have reported 59 fatalities from an outbreak of Lassa fever since 3rd of January. In a statement, the National Center for Disease Control said 19 people died last week due to the outbreak, while a total of 358 cases have been detected since January the 3rd. 679 cases of Lassa fever were reported in the country last year, while 102 people died from the epidemic. According to the World Health Organization, this viral hemorrhagic fever is mainly transmitted to humans through contact with food or household items contaminated with the urine or feces of mastomys rats. And Lebanon's government has granted French company CMA-CGM a contract to manage, operate and maintain the container terminal at Beirut port for the next decade. The announcement was made by Lebanese Public Works and Transport Minister Ali Hami. The company said in a statement they plan to invest $33 million to renovate the terminal, including by purchasing new port equipment and constructing a new storage facility. The announcement was made some 18 months after the fatal blast, after the ignition of 2,750 tons of highly explosive ammonium nitrate fertilizer that was stored in the port for years, killing at least 218 people and wounding more than 6,500 others. Since then, the Lebanese economy has plunged and spiraled down into one of the worst crises of the nation's history. So we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurienglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For Telesur English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.